You've been told to manifest through effort, through stacking techniques like bricks, through imagining that more practices equal more power, but the structure you were handed was upside down from the beginning. You may notice how long you've spent trying to pull a desire from the unseen into the visible, wondering why the space between wanting and having feels like a wall that refuses to move. And the quiet truth, the one no one thought to mention, is that the universe isn't delaying you. The delay grows from a belief you were trained into the belief that manifestation unfolds over time. That single idea becomes the waiting room you keep walking back into. You've heard the standard approach before: focus harder, picture it clearer, feel it deeper. Repeat the script until the world responds. It seems wise, even spiritual. It gives you something to do, something to control. But hidden beneath that process is a subtle trap. Each time you treat manifestation as a task meant to produce an outcome, you whisper an unintended message into the field around you. I don't have this yet. I'm separate from what I want. I need time to catch up. And the field, being exquisitely precise, doesn't respond to your hopes. It reflects your state. So if your state is the one who's still waiting, still rehearsing, still becoming, the field mirrors that identity back to you. More waiting, more preparing, more distance. Even the teachings that urge you to trust divine timing aren't malicious. They're simply incomplete, because they reinforce the idea that time stands between you and the reality you long for. But consider this possibility: time isn't a bridge at all. It's a reflection, a surface that shows you exactly which frequency you're stabilizing in this moment. Not the one you aspire to, not the one you're visualizing, but the one you're embodying right now. That's why so many seekers feel suspended between desire and outcome. They've been pouring energy into techniques that assume reality is something outside of them, something that must be persuaded or attracted. Yet the field doesn't operate through coaxing. It responds through collapse, through alignment so clean that the outer world reorganizes itself around the signal you're broadcasting in this very breath. The outer world reorganizes itself around the signal you're broadcasting, and from that realization, a deeper truth begins to surface. You start to sense that manifestation was never about attracting something distant. It was always about collapsing into the version of reality that already matches you. And that shift, friend, changes everything. Because attraction implies motion through time, collapse happens outside of it. Most people picture manifestation as pulling something from far away. They imagine themselves here, the desire over there, and a long invisible rope binding the two together. They tug, they strain, they visualize, hoping the universe will eventually meet them halfway. But collapse doesn't work like that. Collapse isn't a negotiation. Collapse is a recognition and energetic agreement between your internal state and a particular version of reality waiting in the field of possibility. Imagine infinite versions of your life surrounding you, like overlapping layers. In one you thrive, in another you settle, in another you rise unexpectedly. All of those versions exist as potentials, shimmering just beyond your senses. You don't attract one of them like a magnet pulling through space. You select one by becoming the frequency that matches it, and when the match is precise, reality folds instantly, like a sheet of paper bending until 2 points touch. That's the essence of collapse. And yet, you might notice how rarely you stay in that matching signal for long. One moment you feel aligned, confident, connected to the outcome, steady in your vision. The next moment, doubt creeps in, and you begin checking the physical world to see whether anything has shifted yet. That checking is observation of a different kind. The kind that tells the field, I'm still waiting. I'm still separate. I'm still incomplete. The field responds accordingly. This is why collapse requires identity. not effort. Attraction models say, think about what you want until it arrives. Collapse mechanics whisper something far more radical. Become the version of yourself who already lives in that reality. And the field mirrors your being without delay. The universe doesn't respond to your requests. It responds to your resonance. This is what the observer effect hints at, not as a literal instruction manual, but as a metaphor for consciousness selecting outcomes. When you observe the world from lack, you stabilize lack. When you observe from fullness, you stabilize fullness. Observation isn't about looking with your eyes. It's about embodying a state until it becomes your default lens, the filter through which every possibility is interpreted. So the question becomes, which identity are you observing from, not which identity you wish for, not which identity you're affirming, but which identity feels like home in your nervous system, the self who is waiting, or the self who has already crossed the threshold. You can feel the difference, can't you? One tightens the chest, one relaxes it, one keeps glancing at the clock, one forgets time entirely, and that forgetting is the sign of collapse. Because time only matters to the version of you who believes the desire is still ahead. When you become the one who already inhabits the outcome, time dissolves into the background. You no longer measure progress by external markers. You measure it by internal coherence, the degree to which your thoughts, emotions, and embodiment speak the same language. When that language becomes unified, collapse becomes inevitable. Still, you may wonder how this unification actually feels. It's simpler than it seems. It feels like clarity without strain. It feels like certainty without intensity. It feels like choosing the timeline, not chasing it. Collapse doesn't announce itself with drama. It arrives through alignment so subtle you almost miss it when your breath matches your intention, when your decisions reflect your desired identity, when your emotional body settles into a frequency that no longer oscillates. Attraction requires trying. Collapse requires matching. And matching begins the moment you stop thinking of manifestation as something outside of you and start sensing it as a shift occurring within you, a shift so precise that the universe has no choice but to respond. This is collapse, and this is where your acceleration truly begins. The moment collapse begins to reveal itself in your life, you start to notice something else, a subtle turbulence beneath the surface. A kind of static that rises whenever you try to hold the aligned frequency steady. That static is the split signal, the quiet tug-of-war between who you consciously want to become and who your subconscious still believes you are. And unless you understand this conflict, the acceleration you felt will always stall. Because while your conscious mind dreams in possibility, your subconscious moves through familiarity. It clings to what it knows, even if what it knows is uncomfortable. You may speak the language of abundance, but your nervous system still remembers scarcity. You may affirm love, but your deeper patterns still brace for loss. And when those two signals broadcast at once, the field receives a mixed transmission, one thread whispering yes, another quietly insisting no. Collapse cannot happen in contradiction. Think of your signal like a melody. Your conscious desires create the top note bright, clear, intentional. But your subconscious expectations supply the baseline, the undercurrent that shapes everything. And the field follows the bass, not the melody, because the bass is what plays continuously. It's the emotional hum powering your choices, your posture, your breath, your reactions. Even when your mind is focused elsewhere, the field reads the total signal, not the prettiest part of it. This is why people feel stuck even when they're doing everything right. They visualize, they journal, they construct vision boards, they speak their desires aloud. But underneath those conscious efforts, the subconscious quietly repeats the old program. the one that formed from years of lived experience, patterned emotion, and unexamined expectation. And the field, precise as ever, mirrors the dominant pattern, not the hopeful intention layered over it. You've likely felt this contradiction. One moment you glimpse the future so clearly you can almost touch it. The next, doubt creeps in, not as a thought, but as a feeling, a tightening in the chest, a slight collapse in posture, a familiar fear whispering that nothing is changing. That whisper isn't your conscious voice. It's the residue of old timelines still echoing within your emotional body, asking to be acknowledged before they can release. This is where the work deepens. Not in the mind, but in the emotional architecture beneath the mind. Conscious desire is fast. Subconscious expectation is ancient. It was built through repetition, through memory, through the stories you once believed about who you were allowed to be. And those stories don't dissolve because you speak new words. They dissolve when you feel new truths consistently enough that your emotional body begins rewriting its own script. You may notice this rewrite beginning not through grand breakthroughs, but through subtle shifts, reacting differently to a situation that once triggered fear, choosing rest where you once chose urgency, noticing that the version of you who always expected disappointment is quieter than before. These moments matter. They're the tectonic movements of identity shifting beneath the surface. They signal that the subconscious is loosening its grip on the old frequency and exploring the possibility of a new one. And when the subconscious begins to change, the signal stabilizes. What was once a wobble becomes a tone. What was once static becomes coherence. The field can finally recognize you not as someone who is hoping, but as someone who is becoming. And in that becoming, collapse accelerates. You're no longer broadcasting from two timelines at once. You're speaking a single vibrational language, clear, steady, unmistakable. But don't misunderstand, this isn't about erasing the subconscious or forcing it into silence. It's about integration, letting the deeper layers of your being feel safe enough to join the frequency your conscious mind has chosen. Safety creates coherence. Coherence creates collapse. And collapse creates the reality your desire has been pointing toward all along. Not as fantasy, but as a frequency you can embody. So the real question becomes, what is your dominant signal? Not what you wish for, but what you repeatedly feel. Not what you say, but what your nervous system knows. When you bridge the gap between conscious desire and subconscious expectation, manifestation stops feeling like effort. The field stops receiving mixed instructions. Your signal becomes singular, and singular signals collapse timelines with startling speed. This is the heart of the split signal, and when you learn to unify it, the field listens instantly. You can feel the split signal softening as the subconscious begins to shift. And from that softening, another realization emerges that emotion, not thought, is the real technology behind collapse. You may have suspected this in quiet moments, when a single wave of gratitude changed your entire perception, or when a sudden feeling of certainty seemed to bend reality without warning. Those weren't coincidences. They were glimpses of how the field actually interprets your signal. Because the field doesn't respond to what you think. It responds to what you feel. Emotion is the voltage behind the frequency. Emotion is the signal that reaches the field before any words do. Thought can point the arrow, but emotion is what shoots it. And once you understand that, the entire architecture of manifestation begins to reorganize itself within you. You realize why weeks of positive thinking can collapse under a single hour of anxiety. You understand why someone can visualize abundance every morning and still feel scarcity by nightfall. You see why patterns repeat, not because your thoughts betray you, but because your emotional body continues broadcasting an older timeline while your mind attempts to choose a new one. Emotion is the carrier wave. It shapes the rhythm of your field. Most teachings tell you to think positively, but thinking positively without emotional coherence is like whispering against the wind. The subconscious isn't moved by logic. The field isn't shaped by intention alone. They shift when your emotions shift, because the emotional body is the part of you that speaks the language the universe actually understands. Consider how your body responds when you feel genuine gratitude, not fabricated, not forced, but real. Your breath slows, your chest opens, your posture changes, your nervous system relaxes. And in that relaxation there is coherence, because your entire being is resonating in a unified direction. That unity transmits a clean frequency. Now compare that to moments of fear. The body tightens, breath becomes shallow, the mind accelerates while awareness contracts. This, too, is coherence, but coherence into a timeline of scarcity, danger, or delay. The field responds with precision either way, because it reflects what you are broadcasting consistently, not what you hope to broadcast. This is why a single moment of genuine emotional alignment can collapse more reality than 100 reheated affirmations. Emotion bypasses the thinking mind. It speaks directly to the field. It shapes the timeline far more efficiently than intention alone. You've probably experienced this without recognizing it, moments when clarity hit you so abruptly that it changed your entire next step. Moments when you felt unusually calm and events unfolded effortlessly throughout the day. Moments when a subtle, steady peace magnetized solutions you couldn't reason your way into. Those instances were not luck. They were windows of emotional coherence, and coherence carries you. But here's the paradox most seekers miss. Emotional alignment isn't about maintaining high-intensity joy or excitement. Those states are powerful but unstable, and often tinted with subtle desperation, the kind of energy that says, "I hope this works." That hope reveals a gap, and gaps slow collapse. The emotions that accelerate manifestation are the ones that feel grounded, embodied, and calm, states like gratitude, trust, and peaceful certainty. These emotions don't grasp, they don't demand, they don't push the field. They simply radiate coherence, and the field mirrors that coherence effortlessly. You begin to see that your task isn't to force emotion, but to generate it, to choose feelings that match the timeline you're calling in. Long before any external evidence appears, you generate certainty not because life is giving you certainty, but because certainty is the signal that aligns you with the version of reality where things already work in your favor. Emotion, in this sense, becomes the memory of your desired future. When you repeatedly choose an emotional tone that matches the reality you want, your body starts to internalize it. Your nervous system begins remembering a frequency that your mind hasn't yet seen reflected physically. And when the body remembers, the field responds. Because a remembered emotion becomes a lived one, and a lived emotion becomes a stabilized frequency. And stabilization is what collapses timelines. So ask yourself, what emotion matches the life you desire? Not the surface reaction, not the fleeting excitement, but the baseline frequency of the version of you already living that reality. Is it calm confidence, quiet abundance, steady love, peace that doesn't wobble? Once you identify it, you can begin to practice it. Not as pretense, not as performance, but as the energetic signature you choose to embody. The signature that tells the field, "This is who I am now." And when the field feels that level of clarity, reality doesn't drift toward you. It snaps into place. You may notice how emotion becomes a kind of stabilizer, a tone the universe listens to before responding. And from that realization, another layer reveals itself, something quieter, almost hidden beneath the vocabulary of excitement and positivity. It's the frequency no one teaches you to cultivate. Yet it's the one that collapses reality fastest. Neutrality, not the numbness of apathy, not the coldness of detachment, but the deep, grounded neutrality that emerges when you stop needing your desire to arrive in order to feel whole. This neutrality is not passive. It is powerful in a way excitement can never be. Because excitement, while beautiful, often carries a subtle charge, an undercurrent of, "I hope this happens. I need this to work. I want this so badly." And beneath that wanting is a whisper of lack. The field hears the whisper first, but neutrality speaks a different language. It says, without forcing anything, it's already done. And in that calm certainty, the field finds no resistance. It collapses around your signal with stunning ease. You can feel it when you enter this state. Your breath steadies, your nervous system softens, your thoughts quiet. You move into a kind of inner spaciousness where nothing is missing, nothing feels urgent. You are no longer scanning the horizon for signs, no longer wondering whether the universe is listening. You become the signal instead of searching for it. This neutrality is what mystics hinted at when they spoke of surrender, not giving up, but giving way, letting the timeline that matches your inner state reveal itself without interference. When you stand in this stillness, something remarkable happens. The more you release the outcome, the more the outcome moves toward you. Because grasping frequency collapses possibility into delay, but neutrality collapses possibility into presence. Consider how your life shifts when you embody this state. You stop checking for synchronicities and start noticing them naturally. You stop refreshing your expectations and start resting in them. You stop needing reassurance because certainty isn't a thought anymore. It becomes the background frequency humming through your entire being. This is the neutrality of the observer who has moved beyond hoping. In quantum experiments, observation shapes outcomes. But observation doesn't mean staring at the physical world, waiting for confirmation. It means embodying the vibration of the result before the result appears, not with effort, but with ease. True observation is internal. It's the frequency you stabilize in your body, the consistency with which your nervous system signals safety, alignment, and completion. Neutrality is safety. Neutrality is coherence. Neutrality is the collapse point disguised as calm. Imagine two people. One is trying to manifest with excitement, eagerness, and constant emotional highs. The other sits quietly in a sense of quiet knowing, not forcing emotion, not performing optimism, just resting in the feeling that nothing needs chasing. Which one is broadcasting a clearer signal? Which one is more coherent? The calm one collapses reality far faster because neutrality doesn't contradict itself. It doesn't oscillate between having and wanting, trust and fear, surrender and urgency. It offers the field one stable message: I am already aligned. And the field mirrors that stability. You've felt flashes of this state before, those moments when you let go completely, when you stop caring about the outcome, when you almost forget the desire entirely. And then suddenly opportunities appear, paths open. Someone reaches out unexpectedly. The shift seems random, but it's not random at all. It's coherence. Neutrality removes the wobble. This is why some of your manifestations arrived the moment you stopped trying. You weren't performing. You weren't pleading. You weren't pushing the universe into action. You were simply being. And in the absence of interference, collapse became instantaneous. When you enter neutrality, you step into the version of yourself who doesn't need proof, because proof is the language of someone who doubts. You step into the version who doesn't wait for signs, because signs are for the one who isn't yet aligned. You step into the version who doesn't check the timeline, because time is irrelevant once coherence holds. Neutrality is not the absence of desire. It is the absence of contradiction. desire still lives within you, but it no longer vibrates as longing. It vibrates as presence, as identity, as a frequency already integrated. And from that frequency, collapse isn't something you achieve. It's something that unfolds naturally, quietly, and with surprising speed. So the question becomes, can you allow yourself to rest in this state more often? Can you feel the difference between wanting and being? Can you settle into the timeline where nothing is missing? Because neutrality isn't empty. It's full of alignment, full of inevitability, full of the signal the field responds to without hesitation. This is where collapse begins to accelerate, and where your transformation starts moving beyond effort into embodiment. The neutrality you've been settling into doesn't just shift your mind, it begins to seep into your physical presence. And that's where the next revelation emerges. Because the quantum field isn't listening to your thoughts alone. It's listening to your entire body. Every breath, every micro movement, every subtle contraction or expansion in your nervous system. And in that realization, you begin to see that embodiment isn't an optional enhancement. It's the real transmitter. Your body is not a passenger in the manifestation process. Your body is the antenna. When your mind declares abundance but your shoulders tighten with fear, the field takes its cue from your shoulders. When you visualize success but your chest collapses inward with doubt, the field mirrors the collapse. When you affirm love but your breath becomes shallow, preparing for disappointment, the field responds to the breath, the signal beneath the script, because the body never lies. It broadcasts your truest frequency in real time. This is why mental techniques alone so often fall short. You can stack affirmations for hours, but if your nervous system is still wired for scarcity, your signal is fractured. You can visualize wealth with perfect clarity, but if your posture reflects hesitation, the field hears hesitation. You can journal intentions until your hand aches, but if your breath carries the memory of past wounds, the field stabilizes around that older truth. The universe doesn't respond to your sentences, it responds to your state. And state is embodied. You can feel this alignment when it starts forming. Something shifts not as thought, but as sensation, a softening in the chest, a quiet strength in the spine, a steadiness in your gaze. Your body begins moving as if the future you've chosen is already here, not as performance, not as pretending, but as natural expression. This is the first sign of embodiment. The frequency stops living in the mind and starts living in the muscles. You may notice yourself speaking differently, slower, clearer, without the tremor of needing anything to validate you. You may walk with a grounded rhythm as though life is meeting you rather than you chasing it. Your breath deepens. Your reactions soften. Your nervous system no longer braces for impact. This is coherence, and coherence collapses reality faster than any mantra ever could. In physics, there's a principle called entrainment. When two oscillating systems fall into sync, the stronger frequency guides the weaker one. Your body becomes that stronger frequency when it fully embodies the reality you've chosen. Suddenly, your external world, which has always been listening, begins to reorganize around your posture, your breath, your tone. Your body becomes the field's instruction manual. But here's where most people get trapped. They wait for external change before shifting their internal state. They say, "I'll relax when the money comes," or "I'll open my heart when love arrives," or "I'll feel worthy once the evidence appears." And so their body remains loyal to the past. Their nervous system reenacts old memories. Their embodiment reflects the version of themselves who is still waiting. The field has no choice but to mirror that version back. Embodiment flips the script. It brings the future into the present. When you breathe like the person who already succeeded, the field hears success. When you move like someone who is already safe, the field mirrors safety. when you choose with the certainty of someone who has already arrived. The field collapses into arrival. This isn't delusion, this is instruction. Reality is not waiting for your thoughts. Reality is waiting for your body to believe. And belief is not a mental concept, it's a physiological state. It lives in the tilt of your chin, the openness of your chest, the relaxation in your belly, the groundedness of your stance. When these aspects of you align, you stop oscillating between timelines. You stop contradicting your own signal. You stop pulling yourself in and out of alignment with every emotional wobble. You become a single, coherent vibration, and the field responds instantly to coherence. You've already tasted moments of this, times when you simply felt different, and life responded almost immediately. Maybe someone reached out with an opportunity. Maybe clarity arrived without effort. Maybe a path opened in a way you couldn't explain. These weren't coincidences, they were reflections of embodiment. The more consistently your body inhabits the frequency day of your chosen timeline, the easier collapse becomes. You begin living the identity of the future self before the world presents the evidence. You feel it in your breath. You move in sync with it. Every choice supports it. You no longer mimic the future, you inhabit it. And once your body accepts the future as familiar, the field has no resistance left to overcome. You are no longer imagining the desired reality. You're transmitting it continuously, clearly, effortlessly. And transmission is what bends timelines. The moment your body begins transmitting the future rather than chasing it, something extraordinary starts to stir beneath the surface, a quiet shift so subtle that at first you might dismiss it as imagination. Yet it grows stronger each day until you can no longer ignore what's happening. It feels like a pull, a gentle gravitational tug coming from a version of yourself that already exists. And as strange as it sounds, this pull is not metaphor. It's the sensation of resonance reaching backward through your timeline. You've spent so much of your life thinking of the future as something you walk toward. But once embodiment stabilizes, the direction reverses. You're no longer pushing your way through time. Time begins pulling you. It starts as a nudge, an intuitive whisper guiding you toward decisions you can't logically justify. At first, you question it. You wonder whether you're imagining things. You debate with yourself. But as the pull intensifies, the doubts quiet down. You realize you're not forcing alignment anymore. You're responding to it. You're being shown what to do, where to go, what to release, and what to embrace. This is reverse manifestation, the future selecting you the moment your frequency becomes compatible with it. And you've felt hints of this before, moments when something just clicked, when synchronicities aligned so precisely they felt scripted, when life arranged itself in ways you could never have strategized. Those moments weren't luck. They were glimpses of what happens when your timeline recognizes you. Because the future version of you, the one living, the reality you've been calling in, is not somewhere distant, waiting patiently for you to catch up. That version is already broadcasting its own frequency, humming through the invisible layers of possibility. And when you stop sending mixed signals, when neutrality stabilizes your field, and when your body begins hosting the emotional truth of the desired timeline, your frequency rises into match range. The pull begins, and you feel it everywhere, not as excitement, but as inevitability. This pull doesn't use words, it uses sensation. You wake up one morning and feel drawn toward a choice that makes no logical sense, yet feels strangely correct. You notice yourself losing interest in habits or relationships that once felt essential. You feel an inner push to expand, to relocate, to speak differently, to move differently, to release something that once defined you. You sense that something is reorganizing your path in real time. This isn't chaos, it's resonance. You're not being reckless, you're being guided. This is the part that surprises most people. They expect alignment to feel like confidence or clarity, but often it feels like compulsion, a quiet, unmistakable urge to step into a new pattern because the old one can no longer hold your frequency. And as you follow the pull, the external world begins shifting, but in ways that defy linear explanation. People show up at exact moments. Opportunities unfold faster than you can rationalize. Resources appear from unexpected places. Conversations align with uncanny precision. Paths open where logic predicted walls. This is the gravitational nature of resonance. The future draws you toward the events that anchor it into physical form. And because the future has a broader vantage point, a higher coherence, it moves with an intelligence your mind could never strategize. But here's the part: many seekers struggle with. The pull doesn't always guide you toward comfort. It guides you toward alignment. And alignment can feel unfamiliar, even disorienting, because it dissolves everything in your life that isn't a match. Old identities start falling away. Old patterns release their grip. Old versions of you feel too narrow to inhabit. If you resist, the pull intensifies. If you surrender, life accelerates. That surrender isn't passive. It's a collaboration with the field. You're letting the timeline that chose you lead the way. You're letting resonance reorganize your path with a precision your thinking mind could never orchestrate. And the more you allow yourself to follow the pull, the more obvious it becomes that manifestation was never about effort or ritual. It was about match. The future moves quickly the moment you stop arguing with it. You feel less like a seeker and more like a participant in something larger, something coherent, something intentional. The silence becomes directional. Your intuition becomes authoritative. Your emotions become navigational. Your embodiment becomes magnetic. This is the frequency of inevitability, the moment you stop doubting whether your future will arrive and start realizing it's already reaching for you, pulling you into the timeline that has been waiting for your coherence. You're no longer walking a path. You're being carried by resonance. And the more you surrender to that pull, the faster the collapse becomes. You can feel that pull gathering strength, becoming something steady rather than fleeting. And from that steadiness, another moment begins to form, a moment so subtle, so quiet, that people often overlook it entirely. Yet it is the hinge upon which entire timelines swing. It's the collapse moment, the instant when probability snaps into form so cleanly that reality seems to rearrange itself around you without warning. And if you've ever felt a sudden shift in your life that seemed disproportionate to the action that preceded it, you've brushed against this phenomenon already. The collapse moment doesn't arrive with fireworks. It arrives with precision. It begins when your internal frequency stabilizes to such a degree that the field no longer receives contradictory signals from you. The wobble disappears. The doubt quiets. The old identity loosens its grip. Your breath evens out. Your body softens, and in a way that defies logic. The version of reality you've been aligning with stops feeling like a distant possibility and starts feeling like something familiar, almost remembered, as though you've lived it before. This familiarity is the first sign that collapse is near, because collapse is not a leap, it's a recognition. It's the moment your inner world and outer world stop arguing and finally speak the same language. You may feel it as a sudden sense of calm, a clarity that didn't exist the day before, or an unexplainable certainty that something has already shifted, even though nothing external has changed yet. That inner certainty is not imagination, it's coherence, and coherence is what forces the field to reorganize around your new vibrational identity. Then, almost without warning, the external starts to move. A message arrives at the perfect moment. A door opens that wasn't there yesterday. A coincidence lines up with impossible timing. A conversation changes the entire trajectory of your week. An insight lands that reshapes everything you thought you knew. These aren't random, they're signatures of collapse. When the wave becomes a particle in quantum mechanics, it doesn't gradually ease into form, it snaps. One moment it's possibility, the next it's presence. And while the mechanics of human experience are far more complex than subatomic particles, the metaphor remains valuable when your frequency stabilizes. Reality responds in a way that feels instantaneous. But here's the part most people misunderstand. Collapse doesn't always feel dramatic. Sometimes it's eerie in its simplicity. You may realize that the desire you've been trying to manifest doesn't feel like a desire anymore. It feels like something that already belongs to you. The craving dissolves. The longing evaporates. The emotional charge disappears. This is the true threshold, when you stop wanting the thing because you've already become the version of yourself who has it. The field reads this state with absolute clarity. There's no hunger in it, no strain, no asking, no reaching, just embodiment. And embodiment triggers collapse more reliably than any technique, ritual, or affirmation ever could. But collapse comes with strangeness too, the kind that makes you question whether reality is behaving normally. This strangeness is not a glitch, it's confirmation. When reality begins bending in ways that defy your old logic, it's because you're no longer interacting with the same timeline. You shifted tracks, and now the universe is catching up, fast and with uncanny precision. You'll notice patterns dissolving that once felt immovable. People who once resisted you suddenly soften or drift away. Obstacles vanish without you needing to overcome them. What once felt like effort becomes ease. Decisions that used to feel heavy become obvious. This is the collapse moment unfolding in real time, and yet, one of the most profound markers of collapse is emotional independence. You stop needing the external world to validate your inner state. You stop checking for proof because proof is unnecessary. You feel abundant before the money, loved before the partner, successful before the achievement, peaceful before the resolution. And because your inner state no longer depends on external circumstance, the field has nothing left to contradict. It can only mirror your stability. When collapse completes, it rarely feels like a climax. It feels like a shift into a different kind of normal, a normal where what once felt distant now feels obvious, natural, inevitable. That's the quiet miracle of collapse. It doesn't announce itself. It integrates itself. So when the strange begins, when timing aligns, when doors open without force, when calm becomes your baseline, don't question it, don't dissect it, don't retreat into the mind. These are the signs that your chosen timeline has locked into place. You're not imagining the shift. You're experiencing collapse. The collapse settles around you like a new atmosphere, subtle, spacious, almost weightless, and from inside that new reality, another challenge begins to reveal itself. Not a challenge of creation, but a challenge of maintenance. Because once a timeline collapses into form, your next task is not to chase more shifts, but to stabilize the one you've just entered. And this is where so many people unintentionally unravel their own breakthroughs. Integration is not as glamorous as collapse, yet it is just as essential. Collapse snaps reality into alignment. Integration keeps it there. You may feel the impulse to celebrate the shift, but somewhere within you another motion begins adrifting. A subtle pullback toward old patterns, old emotions, old expectations. Not because you failed, but because your nervous system is still adjusting to the altitude of your new frequency. You didn't just change your circumstances, you changed your identity. And identity always seeks familiarity. This is why integration matters so deeply. Collapse gives you the aligned timeline, but integration determines whether you remain in it or slip back into the version of yourself who manifested the previous one. Let's explore how this unfolds in the body and the field. When a new frequency stabilizes, your mind often adapts faster than your physiology. Your thoughts align, your decisions align, your vision aligns, but the body lags a little behind. It remembers the old rhythm, the old emotional patterns, the old instincts for protection. The nervous system tries to re-anchor itself in what it once believed was safe, not realizing that safe was simply familiar, not aligned. This creates an internal wobble, a tiny, almost imperceptible oscillation between the new timeline and the old. If you don't recognize this wobble for what it is, you may interpret it as doubt, anxiety, or confusion. You may even think you're losing momentum or sliding backward. But what you're actually experiencing is recalibration. You stepped into a new vibrational landscape, and your emotional body needs a moment to orient itself. This recalibration is where many people unknowingly collapse back into their old timeline. They misinterpret the discomfort as a sign that the shift wasn't real, or that the universe is testing them, or that they need to work harder to re-manifest what they already received. But alignment is not lost through lack of effort. It's lost through lack of neutrality. Remember, neutrality is the anchor of coherence. When the wobble appears, neutrality absorbs it. Without neutrality, the mind tries to fix, adjust, or control what was never unstable, and the moment you slip back into effort, you reintroduce the frequency of not yet, dissolving the timeline that just collapsed. Integration asks you for something far simpler. Hold the frequency without negotiation. That doesn't mean staying in a perfect emotional state. It means staying consistent in identity. Consider the difference. The old identity checks for signs. The new identity assumes alignment. The old identity fears losing the breakthrough. The new identity recognizes the breakthrough as a reflection of who they are now. The old identity waits for validation. The new identity radiates without needing proof. Integration is the art of choosing the new identity repeatedly until it becomes your default. Not through force, but through familiarity. The more often you return to the emotional state of the new timeline, the more your nervous system rewires itself around it. Eventually, the new frequency stops feeling new altogether. It becomes home. And once something becomes home, the field no longer needs to work to reflect it. Reality stabilizes on its own. Another important part of integration is releasing the impulse to escalate immediately. After collapse, many seekers think, great, what's the next thing I can manifest? But acceleration that isn't anchored becomes volatility. Timelines shift faster than your body can adapt, and the nervous system becomes overwhelmed. Integration teaches you to hold one frequency fully before reaching for another. You're not climbing a ladder, you're stabilizing layers of identity. With each layer, your field becomes more coherent. With each layer, collapse becomes faster. With each layer, the next shift requires less effort and less recalibration. Integration is cumulative, and the markers of successful integration are subtle but powerful. You stop questioning whether you deserve the new reality. You stop waiting for the other shoe to drop. You stop comparing your current life to your old one. You stop feeling shocked when good things happen. You stop holding your breath. Life starts to feel like a continuation of something you always knew was coming. This is when the new timeline becomes permanent. Integration is not a test. It is a merging the moment your mind, body, and field align into one coherent identity. Without integration, collapse is temporary. With integration, collapse becomes your new baseline. And once reality stabilizes around your new identity, the next shift becomes easier than you ever imagined. You can feel the new timeline settling beneath your feet, not as something you're holding on to, but as something holding you. And as that stability deepens, a larger truth begins to reveal itself. A truth that extends beyond your personal field, beyond your private shifts, beyond the boundaries of your identity. Because once coherence becomes your way of being, you start to sense that your transformation is part of something wider, something woven through collective consciousness itself. Your personal alignment does not stay personal. It radiates, it transmits, it influences, and this is where the collective field enters the story. Most people imagine consciousness as an isolated experience, each person manifesting in their own corner, with their own desires and their own energy. But the quantum landscape isn't built like a collection of separate rooms. It functions more like a shared ocean, with individual frequencies interacting, amplifying, and stabilizing one another. When you shift, you alter the water you're swimming in. When you stabilize, you change the environment for everyone. When you embody coherence, others feel it even if they never speak it aloud. This isn't mystical exaggeration. It's how resonance works. When one frequency stabilizes at a strong amplitude, nearby systems begin to sync with it, the same way a tuning fork vibrates another at a distance. Your inner coherence vibrates through the spaces between people. The timeline you inhabit becomes easier for others to access. This is why some communities experience sudden waves of growth. It's why certain friend groups evolve together. It's why meeting someone aligned can accelerate your path more in one conversation than months of solitary effort. Resonance moves through collectives, not individuals alone. And whether you realize it or not, your shift is already sending ripples into the field. But here's the deeper revelation: the more individuals stabilize in coherence, the more the collective probabilities of humanity shift. The field doesn't just mirror personal frequency, it mirrors collective patterns too. So every time a person moves from fear to neutrality, from striving to embodiment, from scarcity to sufficiency, the shared field brightens. A new probability becomes more accessible not just for you, but for everyone. You've seen evidence of this already. Think of how new ideas spread not through force, but through resonance. One person embodies a new truth so fully that others can feel it. They don't just hear the words, they feel the vibration. Something inside them recognizes home, and in that recognition, they rise. This is how collective awakening happens, not through mass instruction, but through distributed coherence. And your timeline is part of that shift. You might think your breakthroughs are small, private victories, but consciousness doesn't work in isolation. When one node changes, the entire network recalibrates. Even if only slightly, your inner peace reduces the ambient anxiety of the shared field. Your emotional coherence stabilizes the energetic noise around you. Your ability to hold neutrality creates a pocket of clarity that others can rest within. This is why people often tell you they feel better around you. Even if you never say a word, they're responding to your frequency, not your behavior. And as your coherence expands, something else starts happening. The timelines you collapse don't just accelerate your personal path, they alter the collective map of possibility. Paths that were once improbable become accessible. Solutions that felt impossible emerge. Inspiration moves more freely. And synchronicity becomes a shared phenomenon rather than an individual one. When enough individuals stabilize in aligned frequency, the collective shifts from survival to creation, from fear to curiosity, from stagnation to expansion. This is the quiet revolution of consciousness. But there is another layer, one that often goes unnoticed. As your vibration rises into coherence, You become a reference point for others who are still oscillating, not through teaching them, not through pushing them, but through embodying a frequency that they can unconsciously lock onto. You become a living calibration, a lighthouse frequency in a world full of static, and the more stable your field becomes, the easier it is for others to approach their own collapse moments. You create a resonance corridor, a vibrational environment where breakthrough feels safer, more natural, more accessible. You're not just shifting timelines for yourself, you're opening timelines for the collective. And the collective responds to that opening in ways you may not immediately see. A friend finds clarity, a loved one feels calmer, a stranger finds courage, a community softens. This is the nature of shared consciousness. Your transformation is never solitary. It is always a contribution. So when you stabilize your frequency, when you embody your timeline with consistency and depth, recognize this: you are participating in a larger evolution. You are part of a field that is learning to collapse into higher coherence, one individual at a time, and your alignment, however personal it feels, is shaping the fabric of the collective reality. This is the quiet power of your awakening. It doesn't stay inside you, it radiates outward, reshaping the world one frequency at a time. The collective field settles around you like a new atmosphere, and from that gentler space, we can begin to soften the arc we've traveled together. You may notice how the final echoes of Section 10 linger, the sense that your shift has become part of something larger, something shared, something quietly weaving its way through the world around you. And as that awareness continues to settle, a new kind of stillness rises inside you, not the stillness of waiting, but the stillness of knowing. Because this is where the journey exhales. You are no longer standing at the edge of a transformation, hoping the next insight will carry you further. You're standing inside the transformation, feeling how naturally it moves through your breath, your choices, your presence. Nothing feels forced. Nothing feels rushed. The field isn't something you're trying to influence anymore. It's something you're listening to and being listened to by. This is the quiet truth most seekers overlook. Manifestation becomes effortless not when you master more techniques, but when you merge with the frequency that once felt distant. When the future stops being a destination and becomes a familiarity. When you no longer strain for signs because you've become the sign yourself. You're already transmitting the alignment you once chased. And in this soft, grounded space, the question shifts from, how do I manifest faster, to something much more intimate? How do I stay coherent with who I've become, not through pressure, not through performance, through presence? Presence is what holds the timeline in place. Presence is what lets the field mirror you without distortion. Presence is what reminds you gently, wordlessly, that collapse isn't an event, it's a state of being. So as you step out of this exploration and back into your life, carry with you the simplest truth of all: the field responds to who you are in this moment, not who you're trying to become. And who you are right now is already aligned more deeply than you realize. If there is any call to action here, let it be soft. Return to your breath. Return to your body. Return to the quiet frequency that tells you you're already in motion, not pushing, but being pulled. Everything else will unfold from there.